Is the metaverse still really a thing? In late 2021, the word metaverse saw its peak as a search term on Google, which also coincided with Facebook rebranding to Meta, which seems almost silly now. But if we really think about it, we are spending so much time in front of screens, phones, tablets, and computers, and these are virtual environments. In that sense, maybe we're already in the metaverse. I had the chance to talk to Aaron McDonald, who has built around 50 companies focused on the metaverse. We talked about building the future of the internet, the future of reality, and how having all of these things work together is the key to the mass adoption of the metaverse. Let's get into it with Aaron now. Great to have you here. And I have to say, this is the first time where I am out backgrounded and maybe even out microphoned. I didn't anticipate the Unreal Engine stuff in the background, but kudos to you, man. I love it. How are you doing, by the way?
Yeah, I'm really good. Well, you did say green screen helps, so I just had to get the team to put together something a little bit special.
I like a guy who cares. I love a guy who cares. Okay. Before we get into the main part of this conversation, it's moving. I love it. Why don't you give me a little bit of your background for some context? We'll watch your head, man.
Yeah, so I have a background that started 20 something years ago, maybe 25 now. It's a little bit longer than I'd like to admit, in technology. I started as an engineer in telecommunications. I guess if you could call engineering digging trenches and laying cables. And then kind of just jumped from there into other engineering roles and eventually ended up in kind of senior network roles in both fixed telecommunications, so IP and data, and then mobile after that. I jumped from there into product, which I loved building, developing, managing products, from there into the marketing side of the business, and then jumped out of that into corporate venture, and then eventually made my way into my own startup, and kind of did that almost, I think, 10 or 11 years ago now. And then started venture building from around 2016, and kind of had a wild ride since then.
What's caused the ride to be so wild?
It's just been like a very full on, what is it, almost eight and a half years now, with, going from nothing essentially to a portfolio of 50 or so companies building deep tech in multiple domains, and then going through the process of rolling a bunch of those up to create Futureverse, and then Futureverse going on to kind of do some amazing, incredible things. And, that whole time has been super fast paced. I've got to work with incredible talent, incredible brands, incredible celebrities. So it's just been completely unimaginable when I started this, 25 years ago, digging ditches.
Ditches. I love it. Can I ask you this? What do you think makes a great founder? Right? If you've been involved in 50 companies, rolled a whole bunch of stuff up, you must have been, like you said, working with some pretty insanely incredible people. But what makes somebody who's a founder a great founder? What do you think?
I might steal a little bit here,
Go.
from the founder of NVIDIA, and he was asked a question. If you had your time again, would you do a startup? And what would it be? And he was like, I just wouldn't do it. Like if I'd known the pain and anguish and shame and humiliation and stress and all the things you go through being a founder, then I wouldn't do it. And so the outcome of that, I think, is resilience would be like a very important factor, because you just don't know what's going to get thrown at you. And I'd say the ability to look past what people say and markets say and investors say and believe in your product, mixed with the ability to see when you're wrong. It's this hugely dichotomous feature of good founders where they can understand the line between determination and vision and grit and actually I need to make a change.
how do you help your team understand? Because this is something that I was thinking about actually today and yesterday, right? How do you get your team to understand this idea that no individual day is fatal? Like let's say early on you have like three clients or three customers that you're working with, and all three of them just say, never mind. And you wake up one day and you're like, now what do I do? But you feel like you said, like it's okay.
Yeah.
You feel like you can manage through the process. But you've got 15 other people working with you that are just going like, what do I tell my husband? Kind of thing. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean?
And sometimes you don't even feel like you can.
Yeah.
Like those moments happen where you do doubt yourself. And you have to be able to kind of have the fortitude to push back past that in your own mind. And then, like you said, try and inspire other people. I think it's really important to have two things. One, co-founders who are different to you
Yeah.
in lots of ways, except for those like traits of resilience and determination, so that they can give you a different perspective, but they know that they're on the same journey with you. Co-founders who are just as motivated as you are can push past those, because they'll bring a perspective to the table that maybe you're doubting yourself on, or that you haven't seen.
Yeah.
And the other thing is kind of people outside who aren't part of your day to day, but just love you,
Yeah.
because those two things give you the self belief to go and kind of give the pep talk. And I think
Yeah.
it's important in that to like be as real as possible. You can't always share everything, and there's lots of reasons why that can't
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
the case all the time. But get people back to the reason why they joined, and the bigger picture of the thing you're trying to change. And that's really important too. You can't do this without being in something which is driven by something more than pure success or financial reward. You
Yeah.
have to be doing something that has an outcome that's going to make a change that people believe in,
Right.
because that's the thing that gets you past those moments.
Yeah. And
Not
also
today,
it's a,
but we know we're doing the right thing.
yeah.
And God, if it doesn't work out, at least we tried to make the change.
Yeah. And it's a really good point, actually. And this is something that's hard to articulate, but I think you've actually done it really well. When things aren't going well, or when things aren't fitting into plan, you can always go, you know what, maybe this is not, like if you're adding another product or maybe adding another division or adding something else, and you're like, does this fit into the thing we've always wanted to change, or doesn't it? Because maybe it doesn't, and maybe that's why it's not working. I mean, you remember on the prep call, I said to you, hardworking people can be good at anything, but to really be great at something, you have to care about it. And maybe you're
Yeah.
introducing something that you don't really care about. And you're like, we should stop doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we just don't care. And that's hard to articulate to people, I think.
Yeah. Don't be a founder if you're not doing something you absolutely care about. And and you're right. There is this, let's call it trick, that if the mission stays the same, the product can change.
For sure.
And if you believe in the mission and you find a different way to get there, you're still succeeding.
I like that. I think I'm going to use that quote. If the mission stays the same, the product can change. It's really insightful and actually very tight. It's super tight, right? Because if you can explain that to somebody, if they can get that, I think you win. So talk to me about Futureverse. Like, what is it at scale and what is it meant to be changing? It's a great segue. Yeah.
Great segue there. So Futureverse is a media tech company. And the thing we're trying to do is to make the next version of the internet different in a couple of ways. And people call this the metaverse. It's a pretty loaded term. And people ask me, like, here's some framing that might help you understand how we see the metaverse. People ask me, when's it coming? And my response to that is, it's already here.
Yeah.
You know, the average human's going to spend 45, 46 years of their life looking at a screen.
Yeah.
The idea that there's like this digital economy over here that exists that's different to the other economy, or digital society that's different to the other society, is just a fantasy. They're so tightly intertwined and getting more and more so. So we kind of are in the metaverse. But there's a couple of other things that layer on top of that. And it really comes down to users and communities owning the data and content on the internet. And in a world where that internet is more immersive, where 3D plays a bigger role, it's providing the tools and technology to enable that user ownership. If we achieve that, then the internet should be a better place, and it should be a fairer place, and we shouldn't be forced down a path where giant corporations control everything.
One of the questions that I always want to talk to people about this is this concept of self-sovereign ID. And I am not an expert on this at all.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to talk to you about this, because if the idea is that people are going to be spending 45 years in front of a screen, I have this philosophy. Sorry, just work with me on this for a second, right? I have this philosophy that, like, and I'm going to put it in deep, heavy air quotes, right? But like in the real world, I can't drive a car without a license, which gets issued to me by a government. I pay taxes, that I have a tax ID, I have a social security number, like all these things identify me. Correct. And I kind of understand this idea of anonymity, right? Because if I'm just going to pick a company, right? But if I live in Ghana, but I'm a killer programmer, why are you paying me 40 cents on the dollar, right? When if I was just like born in Tennessee, I'd be making 250 grand a year living in Silicon Valley, but you feel like you can pay me $45,000 just because I'm in Ghana. I'm just picking a country.
Yeah.
So I can see why anonymity would work in that case. But on the other hand, you can't just like walk into somebody's house anywhere in the world and steal their stuff and not identify yourself. Do you know what I mean? So there's this push and pull about like anonymity versus identity. And I think it has to mirror what we do in the real world at some level. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think, and like back to my earlier point, that there isn't really a distinction in my mind between the real world and the internet. Like if we took the internet out of the real world today, society would collapse.
Sure.
And so you're right, in a sense, those two things have to be able to be interoperable.
Yeah.
We actually worked with the government down here in New Zealand to put in place a digital identity trust framework that was signed off by Cabinet, which provides a way for sovereign identity or decentralized digital identity to exist as part of the identity system that powers things like passports or driver's license. And so those two things aren't incompatible. And you can actually get the best of both worlds in some scenarios where if you need to validate some credentials about who you are, what your age is, health conditions, whatever it is, you can do that in a way that provides the other side of that coin with the information they need and the ability to verify that it's you without giving them everything about you. And like the really good common example of this is I go to buy some alcohol at a store. And I have to be over a certain age to do that. In New Zealand, it's 18. And in order to prove that, I have to hand across my driver's license, for example. And I'm giving the store guy lots of information they don't need as part of that. And so with these digital systems, we can make those proofs or those claims without having to give all the information. And I think that's the ideal scenario for anonymity, is allow me to prove the things you need to know without giving you everything else about me.
Okay, so this is where stuff gets really interesting. I mean, there's a concept of a zero knowledge proof, which I'm sure you understand way better than I do. But you did mention earlier this idea of controlling your own data and also controlling your own content, right? So
Yeah.
this is something that I believe in actually very, very strongly, right? And you're right. If I'm 18 years old and I'm in New Zealand and I want to buy some alcohol, all you need to know is I'm 18. You don't need to know where I live. You don't need to know what my birthday is. You don't even
Mhm.
know, you don't need to know anything about me. All you need to know is that I'm 18.
Yeah.
Now, I should be able to parse out all of this information to you digitally. This is why I wanted to talk about self-sovereign identity, because I really want people to get a sense for what this means. But can I ask you this? Are you guys building the tools as well, or do tools exist that you just incorporate into the stuff that you use? So that, and I always use your mother as the example of maybe the person who's not so technologically savvy,
Yeah.
but so your mom can also do it, right? Because this idea of all you need to know is I'm 18 requires me at some level to kind of know that that's the case. So how
Yeah.
do you ensure that, like, I don't know, what do we have now? 3 billion people in the world connected to the internet. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's growing every day, but there's still let's just say half the planet doesn't know how to do all that stuff. And even half of the people that are connected wouldn't know how to do it. How do you make it so easy and seamless for people that in a digital ID environment, they can do that?
Yeah, so let me tackle it in a couple of ways. First,
Thank you.
you mentioned zero knowledge proofs, and people
Yeah.
might not know what those are. And I've kind of racked my brain over time to figure out a way to explain it to everyday people. So I'll give that a go.
Same.
Um,
Same here.
so a zero knowledge proof is a way to prove something to someone or to a system without them having the information directly that was used to prove it.
Yeah.
And like a simple example, like we talked about earlier, I can prove I'm over 18 without giving you my date of birth.
Yep.
How they work is kind of like a maze. So I can prove to you that I can find my way through a maze without ever showing you how I got through the maze.
Yeah.
Because I can go in the indoor and I can go out the outdoor. So absolutely, categorically, I know my way through the maze,
Right.
but you have no idea how I did that. And that's kind of how zero knowledge proofs work. And so we can use that technology to give this really good balance of, privacy along with being able to do the things society needs to validate me and my credentials. How do we make that very complex thing accessible to everyday people? I think if we look at Futureverse, like the number one thing in our strategy, 3 points in our strategy, and the very first thing is make the technology invisible. Right. Every great product feels like magic. And that's one of the biggest problems that has been in the space of this technology is that everyone has focused very much on protocols and economics and incentives and all these kinds of things, and hasn't really stepped back and said, what's the ideal user journey for my grandma? And so that is part of the technology that Futureverse builds. We make technology that makes that journey of using this technology feel like magic.
Can I say this? It's so funny because at the beginning of this conversation, you said as part of your background, you were focusing on IP, and two thoughts in my brain occurred at the same time. I'm like, he doesn't mean intellectual property. He means internet protocol, doesn't he? He must mean that. And it's funny because I always use this as the example. I like the way you're smiling, but I always use this as the example of technology that is magic, right? Like my mom knows how to send an email, but has no idea what TCP IP is, right?
Yeah.
And never needed to know, right?
And POP3 and SMTP and all the stuff that email makes it magic. And I kind of say like same similar example, Netflix. It's extremely complex behind the scenes. There's like dedicated data center infrastructure and networking equipment and caching equipment and sophisticated applications. But I can just press a button and watch whatever I want.
Exactly.
And so that's the kind of experience we have to be able to deliver to make these systems scale.
Okay. What are the other two things that you're focused on? Because you said
Huh.
one is making the technology invisible. What are the other two for Futureverse?
Yeah. So the second thing is to demonstrate the open metaverse in action, because people have talked about this idea um, of interoperability, of portable content, particularly in a gaming context, because a lot of these ideas come out of gaming,
Yep.
um, and we've never seen it anywhere. For the billions of dollars that have been spent on this idea, there isn't anywhere you can go to and see this at scale. And so, and that's because there are some hard technical problems that until we started solving them weren't solved. But also, there hasn't been like a hero to bring that to life. And that's one of the reasons why we partnered up with Ernie Klein, who wrote Ready Player One, because this is the thing in people's minds that typifies or exemplifies the metaverse and pop culture. You can watch that movie and you can get a sense of what the internet could be. Um, and so we want to bring that to life and demonstrate how this stuff works.
Yeah.
And then the third bit is to address your earlier point. How do you get these, 3 billion odd and growing people to engage with this, what can seem like unnecessary technology in their minds, maybe? And that is to do that through what we call play and learn. Make it fun, make it a game. People are playing something, doing something that's fun. And in that process, they're learning why it's important for you to own your identity in a digital world. It's important to protect your data and be careful about where it's used and who has it.
Right.
And start with the fun and then learn through that fun.
Yeah. So I'm pretty confident you'll never have to teach my daughter why that's important, but you may have to teach her grandfather, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And I hate to say this, but I think something like 22 million people in the US who voted in the previous election just died because of their age, right? So those are the people that are just gone. It's not a nice topic, but you understand the point that
Yeah.
it's like 7% of the US population is just gone,
Yeah.
right?
And I
So
think
that happens over time. Sorry,
to
go
your
ahead.
point, though, I think there are plenty of younger people who do understand this, but there are also
Yeah.
equally plenty that don't.
Fair
And
enough.
we're at this precipice, I think, in the history of humanity where if we're at this fork in the road where if we don't take the option of self-sovereignty online,
Yeah.
we won't even have the chance to think about it in the future because the mind control machine on the other side of the fight will be so strong that you can't escape it.
Agreed.
You won't even occur to you to think
Yeah.
about that.
So this is why I talk about this all the time, right? In other words, and I hate to say this, right? Because I agree with you. At some level, I think what we talk about as this sort of technologically advanced, immersive world is going to, by definition, just merge. Like we could say, like there was the regular world and then the electricity world, right? Because electricity wasn't everywhere, but those two things merged. Electricity is everywhere. It's ubiquitous. No one even thinks about it anymore. You just like turn on a light.
Yep.
And I do think that what Futureverse is building or imagining is the same thing. It's just going to be there.
It will.
But
there are two versions of it. There's the Black Mirror version and the version we're trying to build.
Yeah. But the version you're trying to build, I believe, and this is why I'm asking you all these questions, right? Because I'm so interested in this, is that if you and I are having a conversation at a bar, right? And we're just talking about some sport we love. I don't care, rugby. It doesn't matter to me, right? We're just talking about it, blah, blah, blah. Some unknown person or some not real person, some fake thing cannot just come over and interrupt our thing, or 75 of them can't come over and do it. That doesn't exist in the non-technology world.
Yeah.
But in the online world, it does. Those are bots,
yeah.
right? And those things should not be legal. And you should have to identify yourself before you say anything so that I know who I'm dealing with. Again, in a zero knowledge way, just verify that you're a real person. And to get that ID, you actually have to be born or whatever way it gets verified. But you're right, because if it turns into the Black Mirror part of the world, most of the people won't understand and will never have an opportunity to identify themselves and to differentiate their identity from somebody's fake identity. And then it's game over.
It's an incredibly hard problem to solve.
Yeah.
Because even if everyone had a digital identity that they could use online, there's still no way to tell that there isn't a bot behind that. And actually, even a step further, if you think that maybe we'll have these digital twins, agents that act on our behalf,
right?
How do you distinguish between my, authorized representative who happens to be a bot, and me, my digital twin? And so that's like kind of an interesting problem. Then there's like an even further down the track, well, not that far down the track, problem, which is, look at what Musk is doing with Neuralink. The definition of what is human is going to change.
Yeah, that's true.
And there's all this like scary stuff approaching super fast. We're not talking decades and decades here.
Nope.
You're talking within our lifetimes, and so that's why this moment is super, super, super important, that we get and establish a foothold in this idea of personal agency and community ownership of the internet.
Yeah, I agree. Are there other? I want to spend a little bit more time talking about interoperability, because I feel like there are a ton of disincentives for this to happen. Some of which are financial, some of which are political, right? And some of which are just like control oriented. But how do you kind of shoehorn this into a place where, right? Because here's the thing. And gaming is maybe a great example of this, right? Like if I buy something inside a game, I make an in-game purchase, and I love that thing, whatever it is, it's a car or a power-up or an outfit that I like. Historically, it's been really hard to then take that and move it into another game. And part of the reason why was economic. Like that other game just didn't want me to not buy things in their game.
Yep.
That's one. But second of all, you're right. The technological challenges just behind enabling that were super hard. Can you talk a little bit about some of those things as well, just so the listeners can get a better understanding about like why it's not happening and then why it's so hard?
Yeah. So let's address why it was hard. When you built games, typically what you would do is you build the content. Let's take an avatar inside of that game for the game. So what type of game was it? Single player versus multiplayer, for example. For the platform, was it mobile? Was it PC? Was it console? Was it web? For the engine, so it was Unreal Engine, or was it Unity? And for the aesthetic of that game, like what did the things look like? Were they kind of like shiny realistic, or they cartoonish? So each one of those is a thing which then has to be compatible with something someone else built that might not have chosen those same choices. You get this kind of combinatoric problem where it becomes n times n harder for the thing you make to go into every other thing, because all of those things have to adjust. And so people then say, okay, well, we've got these like universal standards, VRMs and stuff like that, and they're a good idea. In practice, it's not as simple as people imagine. And then you add on top of that, like, I made this t-shirt for my avatar, but your avatar might be a giant. So how does it like fit on your giant? Oh, then I've got to go and make a giant sized one. And so I've got to do that for every kind of avatar that exists. And then you've got that layer of interoperability. So these are quite hard problems. And what we did is like maybe look at things from a different perspective, which was, instead of trying to figure out how to make a file that could work everywhere, we figured out how to make a data standard for assets that could be interpreted everywhere. And so we built this thing called UBF, Universal Blueprint Framework, and it allows you to create an asset that can then be interpreted inside an engine like Unreal or Unity. And so you can have the exact same thing appear in multiple places. In fact, I could be in my Unreal Engine app in a first-person shooter and put a hat on, and it would instantly appear in another Unity MMO because the data changes. There's no file change.
Right.
So I don't have to re-render that thing. I don't have to send it anywhere. And now the metaverse of content lives at the data layer as a protocol, as opposed to files, which is what everyone else has traditionally done.
Yeah.
So that's how we solve it. There's some other neat things on top of that. Wearables generator that automatically scales things like t-shirts to different body sizes. So quite complex, deep tech problems that we've got good solutions for. The economic one is like another layer of problem.
Yep.
And I have two answers to that. My belief is that once consumers experience open, they will demand it. Because you want to do it. You just said it'd be nice to be able to do this thing.
Yeah.
And so if given a choice between genuinely owning something that is portable and not, then consumers are going to choose genuinely owning something that's portable because they invest time, emotional capital, real capital in getting these things inside of these games and experiences, and they never truly owe them. And so that will drive people to that outcome. And that has been the case for almost every paradigm change in technology. Consumers get some magic they didn't have before, and if you don't deliver it, you're dead.
I mean, look, there's historical precedent for this in very simple things that everybody understands. I mean, the euro is the perfect example of this. Like, if I go from Italy to Germany, I can carry the same money. Like, that's interoperability at scale. And very easy for people to explain. And nobody wants to go back to a system where you have to do FX just to go between France and Portugal. It just makes no sense, right?
And then I think there are new economic models that you can build off top of that. Like, part of the identity system is that these digital things can now have identity, and you can do things like a passport type system. So, to come into my thing, there's a small charge. And actually, that's probably better for someone who's great at making experiences, because there's a lot of time and cost that goes into building an asset. And they don't need that anymore. They can throw that away because someone can BYO and they pay a little tax on the way in, and everyone will be happy about that. And so they can monetize in different ways. And I think the last thing, probably the most important thing, is scarcity in these historically popular gaming experiences is driven by capital. Because it costs a lot of money, make hundreds of millions of dollars to make these things. Specialist people that are rare, and that's getting obliterated by generative AI. And so if your game doesn't make it in the past, well, we had to suck it up because only you had a couple $100 million to build that experience. But if my AI can build your experience, I don't need you.
Exactly. Yeah, and in this way, the world is getting to be a much more democratized and better place. It's just like which direction it turns at, like at the intersection, right? And you're right. If we just keep going straight, we may have a problem. And I'm not making a political judgment by saying left or right, but like at some point we're gonna have to make a turn. And if we make the wrong turn, it's very Black Mirror-ish. And if we make the right turn, it's just an amazing world where things are frictionless and seamless and much easier, and also probably much safer, it seems to me. I want to ask you about standards, right? So you talked about UBF. how do you solve the kind of Betamax VCR problem, VHS problem? Do you know what I mean? Whereas like
Yeah.
whether it's Futureverse or any other company, right? Um,
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is make it a standard and make it an open standard, and that's the process we're on now. You're part of the Futureverse roll up was a company called Crucible, who produces the Emergence Interoperability SDK. They're a founding member of the Open Metaverse standards body. And so we kind of very big believers in taking this stuff and making it an open standard. I think that's the first step. I think the second thing is momentum, right? So you have to, even if your technology isn't the best, if you get the best network effects, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
and so, that's why we're partnering with these really big, well-known, well-loved franchises, sports teams, brands, to kind of get this stuff into the hands of everyday people as quickly as possible. And if you can do those two things, then I think you can kind of win. But the win we're trying to make is not like win for us. It's like to win the race. And if someone takes our standard, and the race is like interoperability, if someone else takes our standard and builds on top of it and they do a better job of it, we'll use that.
Yeah, you're happy. I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise, if you weren't happy about that, then you're doing something wrong, right?
Exactly.
You're not representing actually what you want to have accomplished. And you're
exactly.
like, oh, they did it. Well, then screw them. You're just like, great. At least somebody did it because that's the good outcome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to give an example of a partnership that's working and like how it all fits in and how all these small things that you're working on tie together, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I think a really good example that the audience could go and give a go now is the Reebok Impact experience. So you could go to reebokimpact.com or find Reebok Impact on Instagram and DM it. And one of our agents will talk you through creating a one-of-one digital Reebok pump or Reebok Classic, your choice, from a memory in your Instagram. So you can turn a memory into a unique 3D digital wearable that then you can take into Roblox, for example, or one of our games and applications and experiences. And you can do that whole process. And my grandma's done it. It's grandma proof.
I like it.
Well, actually, my mother, who's my daughter's
grandmother, fair
grandmother, has done it. It's grandma proof without knowing that you interacted with an AI agent. You created a Web3 smart wallet. You minted an NFT. Like none of that stuff is in your face.
Right.
All from Instagram.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
That's super cool. I always have this thought, right? I studied Japanese in college. And one of my earliest professors who was teaching us Japanese was also getting a PhD in etymology, right? So the study of words and word origins. And he would come into class some days, like his hair would be a mess. He was really exhausted. And this idea of like where words came from, he was, for lack of a better term, he was so deeply immersed in this world that coming out of it for him was hard because everything to him now looked like part of his PhD thesis of like, where did this word come from? Why does it mean that thing? Why do we conjugate this verb that way? Why is there English and Japanese? All these things that he was thinking about. And I can't help but think that like your team must spend so much time in Unreal Engine and in manufactured universes, again, for lack of better terms. Yeah.
Yeah.
That sometimes when you come out, and I'm like looking out a window right now to a bridge that's in a bay with cars going past it, all of these things didn't exist 100 years ago, right? And would have seemed fantastical.
Yeah.
If I had told you they were going to be there, and yet there they are running around like it's just normal.
Yeah. Crazy.
Does it make you look at the physical world philosophically in a different way when you're spending so much time building virtual worlds that are starting to get closer and closer in detail and in feeling to the physical world in which you exist normally. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's kind of a tussle I have in my head sometimes to imagine that they are separate things.
Right. That's my point. Sorry, go ahead.
And I grew up in a rural community and in a farming family. And I have a little plot of land which I can escape to. And I just like to go and pull weeds on the weekend. Because it gives me the opportunity to step back from what you just described. And, think about my existence in this, very physical world where I've got dirt on my fingers and a thorn in my palm, So yeah, I do kind of, I wouldn't say struggle with it, but it's always in the back of my mind that the decisions we make exist inside of this bigger, more physical world. But at the same time, that digital world is exerting so much influence on this physical world around us. And the two are intrinsically linked. If you believe in climate change, for example, the information around climate change and the narrative around climate change all exist in the digital world. And whatever outcomes of that information war or information exchange are going to impact our planet one way or another, the literal air we breathe. And so for me, they are very indistinguishable things.
Yeah. I just kind of want to leave people with that philosophical thought of, like, over time, what is reality?
Yeah. We could do a whole podcast on that.
Yeah, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but I do want people to think about it, because that's the kind of the genesis of the question that I asked you. It's like, if you're constantly immersing yourself in a digital world that you created, right? Like all the stuff that was behind you and the Unreal Engine, automated video and stuff that you were playing before, like it's not real. But I mean, if you think about even just the development of Unreal Engine over the last, 30 years, and Unity as well, we can give a shout out to both of them, right? Because they both do good work. They couldn't have conceived how realistic things would look 30 years later. And now they're probably looking at things and just going, maybe we should stop. Do you know what I mean? In a philosophical way. And that's the kind of thought I want to leave people with. It's like, what are we creating? What should the outcome of that be? And the fact that companies like Futureverse exist, it's like less of a company and more of a philosophy around what do we want the future of this merged online and offline world to look like? And we don't want it to be dark. We want it to be light. Yeah,
I think that's a good way for people to think about this. Is it's not just some video game your kids play. It's actually the future of reality. Let's leave it with that. I really want to thank you for doing this. Really, I mean, this has been awesome. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Aaron McDonald, the founder and CEO of Futureverse. Yeah, you have to come back on. We have to have longer conversation about more stuff if that's okay with you.